to conclude that this was a result of politics and DEI programs from his predecessors?
Zero evidence that has been presented. And he himself, I think we need to be very, very clear, said himself there from the White House today that he didn't know himself whether this had anything to do with so-called DEI hiring initiatives. This from the president today, just 1 week after his inauguration, hours after more than 60 people were killed just 5 miles from the White House. He equated the tragedy and placed blame on non-white, non-disabled people. He suggested that a former Department of Transportation secretary was BS. He alluded to an FAA group inside the FAA that he was referring to that said that the FAA was too white, in his own words. He then made reference to people with disabilities. He made a reference to dwarfism, hiring practices of inclusivity that for more than a decade now, the FAA, including during his own first administration, sought to expand the reach of individuals that they brought into the FAA. And let's be clear, if we may, when we're talking about the FAA, there's been a chronic understaffing of air traffic controllers. And yet what we heard from the president today was not an acknowledgement about some basic issues that have been acknowledged here up on Capitol Hill and from previous administrations before, but instead he blamed DEI policies and hiring practices when still hours later he has presented no evidence and no specifics that would corroborate any suggestion that somehow any of the individuals that were involved in this crash or were air traffic controllers were somehow inappropriately hired or had inadequate experience or reason to be in the positions that they were, including 3 members of the military.
And just remind me, Trump's inaugurated on which date?
It was January 20th.
So our timeline of Trump's aviation actions as the President of the United States goes like this. On January 20th, the FAA director leaves the office under pressure. On January 21st, the air traffic controller hiring is frozen, so no more can be hired. And on January 22nd, the Aviation Safety Advisory Committee is disbanded. Does the White House have any comment about any of those actions?
No, we're still waiting for this point in time, and I think it's important to note that the pool camera actually just went into the Oval Office as the president was signing another executive order just literally in the last 15 minutes, and he was asked about those comments to clarify again his idea that DEI was responsible in part for the tragedy, and he said, well, it could be, again, not being definitive with it, but again, not pulling back, understanding the heartache that people are going through here, and again, him or the White House not providing any specifics that would suggest otherwise.
There is a Musk thread that I must pull with you, Von Hillier, based on reporting from Reuters. I'll read you that reporting. Quote, Federal Aviation Administration Chief Mike Whitaker will step down when President-elect Donald Trump takes office next month. This is from December. SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, a close advisor to Donald Trump, in September called for Whitaker's resignation and harshly criticized the FAA's decision to impose a $633,000 fine on SpaceX after the agency said the company violated launch license requirements. Elon Musk is the richest person in the world, I believe, and he had this person fired because of a $633,000 fine on SpaceX. Do Elon Musk or SpaceX have any public comments today on that?
Not that I have seen at this point in time here. I've been tracking that as well here. And on the point of Elon Musk, though, could I add this, though, Nicole,
Please.
too, that I think when we're talking about individuals and allies of Donald Trump, I think that so many of the stories that we are looking at, including this one, come down to who is that nucleus around Donald Trump. And one other name that I would throw out there would be Charlie Kirk. And the reason I bring up Charlie Kirk is because 1 year ago, I, along with a few other NBC colleagues, reported a story in which Charlie Kirk, the right-wing provocateur and ally of Donald Trump, he had put out in the public sphere on a podcast that he was concerned when he got on airplanes when he saw a black pilot because he questioned whether they were hired because of DEI hiring initiatives and not because they were qualified. And at that time, there were some allies of Donald Trump's, including RNC Chairman Ronna McDaniel, who went directly to then candidate Donald Trump with that specific remark. And they wanted to make sure that Donald Trump heard that because they thought that he would not want Charlie Kirk around him because of that suggestion that somehow black pilots were not qualified to be flying in America. And instead, 1 year later, when I heard those remarks from the White House, it took me back to that story 1 year ago, because instead of Donald Trump pushing Charlie Kirk away, he fundamentally embraced that very ideology that of questioning the aviation industry and the extent to which individuals are in it, whether they be pilots or air traffic controllers or even members of the military, because of DEI hiring initiatives.
How often does Charlie Kirk fly? Do you know? Does he have a job that requires a lot of plane travel?
He travels through his Turning Point organization that is a conservative activist organization.
I mean, he'd have to fly an awful lot because according to the FAA, 94% of all pilots in America are white. Do we know if he had a bad experience or a bumpy flight, or was it just simply rooted in racism?
I don't have an answer to that question other than he said that when he got onto a plane and he saw a black pilot, he said that he questioned for his safety and whether that individual was hired for DEI practices.
You'd have to take a whole lot of planes to even see a black pilot based on these statistics. I want to read you Pete Buttigieg's response, Von Hilliard. He wrote this about Trump's comments: despicable. As families grieve, Trump should be leading, not lying. We put safety first, drove down close calls, grew air traffic control, and had 0 commercial airline crash fatalities out of millions of flights on our watch. President Trump now oversees the military and the FAA. One of his first acts was to fire and suspend some of the key personnel who helped keep our skies safe. Time for the president to show actual leadership and explain what he will do to prevent this from happening again. Is there a sense that there is some culpability from the White House? Is that why they went out and attacked DEI and the Obama and Biden administrations?
And we should be clear, too, that Sean Duffy, who is his new Department of Transportation Secretary, was right alongside of him earlier today, as well as Pete Hegseth, his new DOD Secretary, and they were echoing directly the words of Donald Trump here. And, of course, they are only 10 days into their administration, but I think that this is where it gets at the heart of honestly, Donald Trump placing blame on this practice that was very clear, implemented during his own administration the first go-around. And we're finding from our longtime producer, Jay Blackman, who is reporting in just the last 2 minutes, that the last night at DCA, that a source with knowledge of the situation tells NBC, the staffing inside of that traffic controller was, quote, not normal. And the reason I bring that up is that's not to say that there are not legitimate concerns about what happened last night. 67 people lost their life. And we know that there's a chronic issue of air traffic controllers and their ability and the staffing levels. And yet what Donald Trump focused on were not the institutional questions that, of course, have long plagued the FAA, but instead placed blame on individuals who were, frankly, who he claimed to be perhaps not qualified to be in these positions in the first place.
It is tragic that the first work after honoring the victims and what we're learning about their stories is to do the fact checking.